The project planning process has a lot of components that need to integrate together, and to many new project managers, the whole thing can seem bewildering. So, in this video, what I want to do is to go through the elements of the project planning process in a sequence, just so that you can see how the different parts fit together. Now, it's important to note that this sequence is a simplification. Obviously, when you complete one part of the planning process, you may need to go back to an earlier part and review it to make sure that everything is self-consistent. But the sequence I'm going to show you has served me well in understanding how I can build effective project plans. Everything starts off with two things really, and the first is the client's requirements. The second is the problem or the opportunity that the project is setting out to solve. And I'm going to assume, by the way, that you've already done the work that you need to on your project definition. You know what your project is, and you know something about the problem or the solution. You know something about the client's requirements and can feed all of this into your project planning process. And alongside these two kind of starters, it's also worth mentioning the importance of the team's experience and stakeholders' perceptions, particularly around the problem and the solution that you're trying to implement. So we've got these, and the first step is to feed these in to understand the scope of your project, and you will have done a fair amount of that work in the definition stage. Now, we'll come back to the client's requirements because the scope of work is by and large dictated by the nature of the problem and the solution that you found and stakeholders' perceptions. Now, in the planning stage, the next thing to consider is to take your broad scope of work and to focus it in detail onto the detailed tasks that are needed. And for this, we use a tool called the work breakdown structure. And it's important to note, by the way, that this is slightly different in the US and US influenced project management arenas from the way that it is in the UK and European project management, where when we talk about a work breakdown structure, we talk about a breakdown of the tasks, the work to be done. So use your work breakdown structure to identify the detailed scope of work. And from your work breakdown structure, you can build two other very valuable planning tools. The first of these is an organization breakdown structure, which is a tool which takes each piece of work in your WBS and allocates it to one or more individuals to give you a breakdown of who is going to be doing what, and we'll come back to this later. The second thing that flows nicely from your work breakdown structure is a cost breakdown structure. Estimate the cost of each piece of work in your WBS, and there you have it. You have a cost breakdown structure. And from this, you can build your project budget. A third thing that you can build from your work breakdown structure is a schedule of deliverables, because the work at the bottom of your WBS, the full scope of work, if you like, also generates the deliverables or the products that you're going to be producing and delivering as part of your project. So you can use this to generate your schedule of deliverables. Now, if you're in the US or you're using a US influenced approach, when you talk about work breakdown structures, you'll actually be breaking down the products, what we in Europe call a product breakdown structure. And so you will go directly from your WBS to your schedule of deliverables or products. This means that you're going to need to work from that WBS to recreate the tasks and therefore the costs and the organizational breakdown structure. So it's slightly different on the two sides of the Atlantic. Wherever you work, one will probably be the preferred default approach. first thing to understand is which is the one that will work for you in your organization and in your culture. Now, once you've got your schedule of deliverables, the next thing you can create are the specification sheets that go with each deliverable. And from that, you can think about your quality management plan and your quality assurance and quality control procedures. All of this has taken us somewhat off the main trunk of our project planning process. So let's go back to that. Let's return to the work breakdown structure. Against each activity in your work breakdown structure, you can now estimate the workload, the time it will take to deliver that piece of work. In fact, in true planning sense, there are two measurable things that you're going to be estimating. The first is the effort it's going to take. That's the number of person hours of work that's going to go into it. And the second is the duration. So, for example, if the effort is 10 person hours and you allocate one person to it, then the duration is going to be 10 hours. If, on the other hand, you allocate 2 people to it, then the duration will be 5 hours for most types of task. And likewise, if you allocate one person to the task, but they can only work half time on the task, then your duration is going to be 20 hours. Now, in parallel to doing this, another important and useful starting point for many project managers when they're planning is to think in terms of the milestones, the stages along the journey from the start of the project to the very end. Some project managers start their planning with milestones and then move on to work breakdown structures. Others do it the opposite way round, but these two approaches are complementary and therefore can be done in parallel. There is no logical sequence of which should come first or second. But what happens when you combine your milestones and therefore the key dates with the durations of the tasks? Now you can start to arrange your tasks into a logical sequence. And that logical sequence gives you a network chart. And when you inject the actual times into your network chart, this then gives you a critical path analysis or a PERT chart approach. This is the tool we use to really understand the sequence of activities, how long each takes, and therefore which activities to prioritize in overseeing your project. Now, the reality is that in many projects these days, project managers don't use network charts, PERT charts, critical paths. What we actually use is the Gantt chart. And the Gantt chart is like a sibling to the network chart. It contains the same information, it just represents it differently. So the Gantt chart represents time information and activity information. But instead of allocating each activity a uniform box size, it stretches the size of the box to represent the duration of the activity, and then it plots them onto a timeline so that each activity is representing not only its duration, but the position represents when you're going to schedule it. The Gantt chart is often seen as the most useful single project planning tool for project managers. Now, it's important also to think about stakeholders, and you'll need to engage with stakeholders and communicate with them. And so, whilst you're building your Gantt chart, it's also essential to start thinking about stakeholder engagement. And so, although it doesn't flow logically from your Gantt chart, stakeholder engagement and your stakeholder engagement management plan is something you're going to be developing at around the same time, and that leads logically into a communication plan of how you're going to communicate between your project and each of your stakeholders. The final element of planning that links directly to the Gantt chart is allocating resources to each task. And of course, we've already done that work when we created our organizational breakdown structure, and therefore it should be straightforward to create a resource allocation schedule of some sort. And once we've got that, we can represent that with tools like RACI charts or linear responsibility charts. But the last thing we have to do to really lock our Gantt chart in as our schedule and to make sure we get it right is what's known as resource leveling, making sure that the resources are allocated to individual tasks in such a way that no individuals are overloaded and that the work is spread evenly across your resource team. Now, you've pretty much finished your planning, but there's one other thing to do. And although strictly this comes under the heading of a project control rather than a project planning tool, I think it's worth mentioning the importance of starting to think about risk management and starting to build your risk register around the timings, the budgets, and the resources that you've got allocated. All the information that has gone into your project plan is subject to variation. You will have made many assumptions, and any of those assumptions could be wrong. Events could hinder any of the activities that you've planned. They could set back timings, incur additional costs, require additional resources. Resources can let you down too. So, the final thing to do in planning your project is to identify risks that arise from each element of your plan and to enter them onto your risk register. So now you have your full suite of project plans and your risk register from which you can manage the delivery of your project. If you've enjoyed this video and found it helpful, please do give it a like. And please subscribe to our channel and hit the notification bell to be sure that you don't miss any of our future videos. And if you've done that, then I can look forward to seeing you in the next video.